Welcome back, everybody, to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by SupportNow. I am joined today by a future mama, Becca Greer, who is a child life specialist at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. And Becca is one of these people who, not just takes her job seriously, but is so good at what she does and providing kind of a full spectrum of support, not just for the patient, but for all of her families. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to provide more of an expert point of view on what a child life specialist is. In my work doing Support Now, I've noticed there's a lot of confusion between what a child life specialist is versus what a nurse might do. And one of the goals of this podcast is really to equip families and moms with the knowledge and the education that they can use so that if and when they find themselves in a hospital setting, that they can get the support that they need to provide the best experience possible. So with that, Becca, welcome to the podcast. I'd love you just to briefly introduce yourself for everybody listening.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. My name is Becca Greer. I have been a child life specialist at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for almost 8 years. I started out in the emergency room and then moved for about a year. And then I've been working specifically with the inpatient oncology population for the last 7 years. So I work with kids with cancer at diagnosis, and then I work through the end of their treatment, mostly on the inpatient side.
Becca, that just means you've seen a lot of stuff. What is a child life specialist?
A child life specialist is someone in the hospital that has a developmental background in all of child development that helps reduce the psychosocial and psychological impacts that the hospital can have on a patient or family in the hospital. So that's kind of a mouthful. But basically what our job is helping kids cope. So helping kids understand why they're at the hospital, what's your diagnosis, what procedures are happening, what to expect for a procedure, and then helping them through it by using distraction tools and different ways of educating to make sure that they feel empowered for each procedure. But we also are very big on family-centered care. So we don't just focus on the patient, we also focus on the siblings, the parents, aunt, uncle, dog. Everybody who is part of the family is able to be educated by a child life specialist. So we are a service that is free of charge at the hospital. We are, our goal is to see every patient. And we just are here for so many different things: diagnosis education, procedural support, sibling support, coping, bereavement support in those unfortunate situations. So we are just here, we make our list each day of who we're going to see and kind of prioritize our needs and then make sure that we are meeting kids and families where they're at each day in the hospital.
Again, I think it's such a beautiful role. It's such an important role because, as you mentioned earlier in your first description, there is a psychological impact. The second a family enters a hospital, they are walking in with a preconceived notion of what this experience is or what it could be. And to know that there is someone that can walk side by side with the family to help them navigate that is so essential. I'd love for you to also explain at this point, what is the overlap with a nurse? Like, if you're a parent and you're like, how do I know? Is this a nurse question? Is this a child life specialist? Is there like a general framework that you would recommend to help families discern which is which?
Yes. So nurses are always going to be doing anything medical. So they're hanging your fluids or your IV. They might be the ones doing the procedure, giving the shots. A child life specialist is someone that would prepare the child for the shots or would prepare them for the chemotherapy, explaining what medicine they're going to be given, helping them be more compliant with the medicine, whereas a nurse is more of like the medical side. So child life is more of the coping, psychological side of things, whereas a nurse, it would be someone administering or doing the procedure. So I work a lot with our nurses very closely. We collaborate every single day and every single patient. So a nurse might reach out and say, hey, I have to give this injection in this patient's arm. Can you come talk to them about it before? Can we create a good coping plan to help make these shots easier for the patient, for the mom, to make sure that we have like a smooth experience. So I would go in and do my part, and then together the nurse and I would go in and the nurse would give the shot as we joke, child lifing the patient.
The other thing that you mentioned that I think is also important to highlight here, it's You're really talking about the child as a full person. So, what are some of the kind of misconceptions about children in the hospital that perhaps we can learn from you and learn from your perspective on how to talk to a kid that's in the hospital?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot from parents. But I think the biggest thing is that kids are listening. They're listening when the doctors come in for rounds and they're playing on their tablet or they're playing with a game or, Matchbox cars or something, but they're still listening and they're digesting. And I think it's important to recognize that at each developmental stage, kids have different thoughts in their brains. So they might hear these big words and come up with some kind of crazy narrative of what's going on. And they might see mom and dad crying and think, "Oh my gosh, what in the world is happening to me that everybody's crying?" But I think that it's important to recognize that there is all these different developmental levels, and kids are understanding. So in my role, I really promote open and honest communication. I think that is something that is really difficult, as from what I'm seeing with parents, is that it's hard to be honest when your kid's sick. It's hard to say this is what's going on. It's hard for my population specifically to say the words to your child, "You have cancer." Like, what does that even mean? How do you get that out of your mouth? And so I think that I work very closely with parents and talking about how we can talk about this new diagnosis, whatever it may be, in a kid-friendly way, a developmentally appropriate way. How can we make it a not such a scary diagnosis? How can we make sure that they're understanding so that they feel empowered rather than sitting there nervous and scared? So a lot of times I feel that parents are nervous to be open and honest at the beginning, and kind of as we go through our journey together of like me supporting them and encouraging them, I will always respect the parents' wishes because the parents know their children best, but just giving my input that it's important to be honest and that kids will learn somehow what they're going through, and it's usually best coming from parents. So I like to remind parents that, you might be thinking you're sneaky over here talking to the doctor, but the kids are trying to listen and then they're Googling, and you can kind of get yourself in a little bit of a tough situation in that way.
It's so interesting too, but it's an important point that you made. That's like kids are going to fill that void.
Hmm.
So you could either be the first to present that information to them in a way, in a framing that you feel good about, or you kind of risk them filling that void in their own way and perhaps making it worse than perhaps the diagnosis is or the situation is. I'd imagine also it's challenging, especially for your younger children patients that don't even know what the word cancer is.
Hmm.
So it's super, super loaded in the eyes of the parents, of the caregivers. But to a kid, it might be one of the first times they've ever heard it before. So there's this transfer of emotion
Yes.
that happens without really defining what that is. Have you seen situations like that play out?
Yes, all the time. So that's actually one of the first questions that I ask parents when there is a new diagnosis, especially for our younger ones. I say, have they ever heard of the word cancer? Do they know anyone? Because a lot of times you'll hear parents say, well, their grandparents or a kid in our class, their grandma, or, something, they'll have that association, or they've never heard it at all. So what I remind parents is that, like you just mentioned, as adults, we know the magnitude of the big C word, of the word cancer. We know what that entails. We know that means chemotherapy, nausea, hair loss, potential loss of life. Like, we know what this means. Whereas a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or even a 7-year-old who may have never come in contact with this word, or this diagnosis, doesn't really understand what this huge impact means. And so my role in that is asking, what does the child know about cancer? And here's how I would explain it in a way that is less likely to be this big scary thing and more something that they can understand. So for our little ones, I would say if they had like a leukemia diagnosis, which is a blood cancer, I would say right now your blood is sick. We found we can call them sick parts in your blood that we need to make sure that we get out of your blood, and we use a specific medicine that you can only get at the hospital. So that's the explanation of cancer to a 4 or 5-year-old. That means you might have to come to the hospital a little bit more. And then that's what we start there. And then we can lead on to like bigger conversations like hair loss and, different things in that way, but I definitely see that often where parents, they're doing their best because this is I can't even imagine the situation they're in, but feeling as if they're protecting their child from not saying what's going on. And like you said, they fill the void or kind of project those fears onto the kids, and the kids have no association with what this actually is.
Yeah, and the visual that you painted earlier of, the parents crying in the room and the kid not knowing why they might be crying. You want to avoid a situation where they feel like that they've done something, that the fault is on them.
Right. We see
Kids
that a
are
lot.
yeah, and again, to your point, no fault to parents. I mean, I can't imagine, it's a guttural like feeling to like hear this news and not to explode with emotion, and because you also want to be honest with your kids, and there's such a balance, I'm sure, of emoting in front of your kids because you are scared and being honest with them.
And then reminding them that they can be sad and upset. This is a big deal. Reminding parents that it's okay to cry in front of their kids, because some parents hold it all in and like will not show any emotions in front of their kids, and then the kids are like, why are we here? So I always remind parents it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to take your time. We don't have to get the diagnosis and explain day one. So just reminding parents, they know their kids best, they know themselves best. They might feel like some pressure from some of the medical team sometimes to tell their children what's happening, but I always remind the medical team, like, we have to take it one step at a time. We just got this life-altering diagnosis and we need to maybe slow down. So that's kind of where I come in as an advocate for parents as well in that role.
Again, I'm just envisioning this through what you shared, and you said it. It's a life altering event, not just for the parents, not just for the patient, but for the entire family, and oftentimes for a community of people. The way that you describe, what is happening to the child is so important, that it's consistent with, from with the parents. And I also think that that gives a framework for the school and for friends that are also conversing, because that consistency is really what's going to drive everyone kind of marching in the same place, versus everyone's kind of saying their own things, and you've got, an aunt over here or a teacher over here, and now you've caused that confusion. How important is it that parents kind of share this, hey, this is how we're explaining it. Here is kind of our approach to this. In your opinion, like how does that play out in real life?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I actually got this the other day. I have a new patient who is 6 and just recently diagnosed with leukemia, and her mom had the same question of, I want to educate her because she's never heard this word. So what do we do to tell her? But how do we tell her classmates in a way that's not scary? And how do we tell them in a way that the parents would approve of? Because some parents want to protect their children from this scary news. But then the mom made a great point of, I don't want her to hide her diagnosis and make it, this is something that other people should be fearful of. So how do I empower her to talk through her diagnosis with her classmates and make this something that is part of her and part of her story now, with also respect for all the other parents, which I can't even imagine the burden that feels like as a mom. So my role in that, I educated her daughter and her about words to use, ways to talk, kind of similarly to what I mentioned earlier, and that, one of the biggest things is explaining that cancer in the pediatric population is very different than adults, and because a lot of kids only know adult cancer. And then just talking about different things that the kids will actually see. So like, their friend might not be in class as much. So what do we do in that way? How do we make the child still feel included? So, we have a program called Monkey in My Chair. So whenever a child's not there, we put the monkey in the chair, and it reminds the class that, this patient still, or this classmate is still part of the class. We're just, she might be in the hospital for a few days, but I do think it's important to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page. I sent that mom home with a lot of books and resources that were age appropriate that she could share with her community however she felt necessary. And just making sure that she knew that she could reach out and ask, am I doing this right? Or how can there's no right or wrong, but just making sure that she felt empowered to educate her community so that she wasn't hiding her child's diagnosis, and that they were embracing it and embracing their community and allowing people to support them in the way they needed.
And even with that description that you provided, it's so hard because you also don't want the diagnosis to be all that people know someone for. I mean, that's the other part. It's like you want it to be a part of the story, but you don't want that to be the entire book. And so there's such a balance, I'm sure, in how these parents are having to navigate. And again, just such impossible circumstances and just such an unrealistic way of living. You never expect yourself to be in that type of situation. I'm also curious, Becca, to ask you, for you've seen a lot of cancer families. What's one piece of advice that you have for friends, for neighbors, for colleagues that want to be supportive of the parents, of the caregivers?
This is something I deal with a lot because I think it's so wonderful. You can really see when there is a new diagnosis or something traumatic that happens in the hospital. Everyone in the community wants to rally around this family, wants to help. But, on the other end of it, on the tail end of it, a lot of times I talk to parents and they tell me, like, this support is so amazing and we cannot be more grateful and thankful, but we're feeling really overwhelmed in how to respond to everybody, in how to ask for help. We don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what we need because we're just now here. And I think that's kind of where the panic sets in of like, okay, let me create some kind of page, like a Facebook page where I'm going to share everything or something. But a lot of parents tell me that they feel amazing that they had this support in the beginning, but sometimes it's really overwhelming. So I think that, and a big part of that is also a lot of times people want to give. A lot of times people want to give toys. And that's something that parents can feel a little overwhelmed with, that, all of a sudden one child's getting so many toys where the other siblings aren't. Or all of a sudden their hospital room is filled to the brim with toys that they feel like, okay, now I feel like I'm spoiling my child. And so I think there's a balance there. But I think that the biggest thing with the community is when you reach out to the family, don't expect a response because it might not happen right away. And I think that, even saying a text that says something as simple as, please don't feel like you need to respond to this. I just want you to know that if you need X, Y, or Z, I'm here. And then offering ways to support rather than, if you need anything, I'm here for you. Saying something tangible. If you need me to take your kids to school on Monday, I can do that for you. If you need someone to go over and walk your dog, please let me know. Just a little more tangible, because I think parents are in this whirlwind of, our life just got flipped upside down. They're worried about the prognosis of their child. They're not thinking of all the things that they need to do until they are, and then they don't know how to ask for help. So I
Yep.
think it's just a very overwhelming time. So as a community, continuing to show that support, continuing to be there for those families, but making sure it's more tangible, and then not feeling hurt if the family's not responding in those moments.
Yeah. What you described is, decision fatigue. Families don't know what they don't know. No, there's no playbook for this. So if you're asking them what they need, it's really impossible for them to answer that question, which means you're going to have to either, figure out a way of framing your offering in a unique and special way, or you're just going to have to do it. And I think that's the other thing that supporters get tripped up on, is they're just waiting for a response. And to a degree, of course, that's necessary. And to some degree, it's not, because the family's just so in it. They're so in it. I'm also curious, though, to ask you about your experience. Let's take leukemia as an example. These things they're not in the hospital for a month and that's it. These are journeys. What's your perspective on how communities can kind of stay engaged? Because from what we see, there's a rush at the very beginning of a diagnosis, but that stampede, it can quickly fade, and that's when we see kind of this loneliness setting in, the sadness setting in. Any point of view or perspective on that piece?
Yeah, that happens a lot. I feel like a lot of people feel the support at the beginning. Everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to do something. And then towards kind of this is leukemia, for example, is a 3-year journey. So the beginning is pretty intense as far as the first few rounds of chemo are mostly inpatient. And then after that, it's outpatient visits. But that doesn't mean it's not difficult, and it doesn't mean it's not disruptive. So I think just continuing to check in with families, continuing to be that support, making a plan with them. Hey, and when you get to this phase, and if you need me to do this, I will do it. Our kids go to the same school. Let me take your daughter to school today or while you have this appointment. I think just like reminding families that you're there is important. Continuing to show up in different ways, however that may be, whether it's, making a meal for them or having, sending an Uber Eats gift card, knowing they're going to get admitted for 2 weeks. Just however you can give, or even just sending a text. I'm praying for you. I hope everything goes okay this admission. It doesn't have to be, something tangible or financial. Checking in. I think that sometimes I hear from moms that one of the hardest parts of being at the hospital is that their people around them are so supportive, but they don't fully understand. So I think that's a big part of one of the big things here I see a lot is parents becoming friends with other parents here, in like our family room and our community rooms. And they're able to say like, well, what's your child going through? This is what my child's going through. And they have these people that understand the hospital. So even if people can come on the family's terms, come visit here and kind of see what a day is like with the family in hopes to support them, not to like just be a spectator. But just, as a support system, like let me come and hang out with your child for an hour while you go grab coffee and a nap. I mean, just things that are very easy to do that can take the load and just the mental load and the burden off of moms and dads. I think it's something that we encourage.
How has your role as a child life specialist impacted the way that you support people?
One of the biggest things I've learned through being a child life specialist is validating others. So your stressors and my stressors may be completely different. You may be going through something huge in your life, or I might be going through something huge, and then someone has a bad day at work where their copier is not working, but that's a big stressor to them. And so validating that like that made your day a really tough day. Your stressors we don't have to compare whose stressor was the worst. Just, reminding myself that everybody's going through different things and everything affects people so differently. People cope so differently with good news, bad news. And so being that constant for friends of just like always going to be the person to validate how you're feeling. Even if you're like, I know this is irrational, but I need to tell somebody, just being able to say like, that's not irrational. I think that you're very valid in how you feel. And just reminding people that it's okay to process differently, cope differently. The way you cope and I cope is very different. And so if this is something that's really bothering you or, stressing you out, like what can I do for you? How can I help you in these ways? So I think definitely being more tangible. I've had a lot of friends recently who've had babies. So instead of saying like, can I come over and meet your baby? I'm like, what food do you want? I'm on the way. If that's okay. So just saying like, what can I do? Like, do you guys need dinner tonight or tomorrow? Or how can I, be there for you this week? And what is your biggest need and how can I fill it? Rather than saying like, I'm here for you.
And I think that last point that you made is connected to the first one where, the friends that show up to the hospital to kind of like a day in a life or an hour in life, you are kind of in a better position to support moving forward because you understand like the day-to-day realities. It's not this like go, 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 there's constant things happening. A lot of hospital life is sitting.
Yeah.
And waiting.
And trying to entertain your child.
And entertaining your child. And the disconnect that moms feel from what I've learned is that the world is still going for everybody else.
Yes.
And you're stuck in a hospital room. So when people say, what can I do to help? Like, well, do you even know what this feels like? And so once you're actually able to like step into that, you're in a much better place to be able to validate that overwhelm because you can't understand until you actually see it and walk it. And of course, there's limitations to that, but there's, even if you can find one person to kind of walk the halls with the mom or sit in the room with the mom to communicate that back to everyone else, that informs people's ability to now be more helpful and provide more meaningful support. And so I think that in some ways that, again, that last point you made is connected to that first one, because once you actually understand that overwhelm, because to your point, that overwhelm may not look the way that you thought it would look. It's not like a house on fire, like frantic. A lot of times it's just it's a lot more internal. So you can't see it, but it's there.
Yeah. And the news changes day to day. So parents are sitting in the room waiting all morning for doctors to come in, and then they might share the same news as yesterday, but they might say something completely out of left field. So I think it's just a lot of, like you said, a lot of sitting and waiting, a lot of anticipation. And then I feel like once they do get information from the doctors, it's like, okay, let me fill in every single person I know that's been asking for updates. And I hear a lot from moms. It's like, do they really want the updates? Do they want the hard and difficult stuff we're going through? Or do they want to hear like, so-and-so had a great day today. We went to the zone and played and feeling great. Or do they want the updates of like, we had a really hard day and my child wouldn't take his medicine and we had to do an IV and the tough stuff. People, I feel like sometimes don't want to fully share everything about the hospital because they're nervous and how other people will perceive it. So I think that's a big factor in that too.
Yeah. It's almost like you're afraid to be honest because you're going to detract from the support because, again, it's just such an unnatural thing to be in a situation like this where if you're honest, then people may say, "Hey, I'm hopping off this train. It's too much for me to handle." So as we wrap up, Becca, I'm curious for, God forbid there are, moms listening that either are experiencing something like this with their child or they know someone who might be in the situation to find child life in the hospital. Like, is it as simple as going to the hospital saying, "Hey, I'd like to see a child life specialist"? So, again, I feel like in some ways this is one of the, I don't want to say it's a hidden secret, but it's like this gem. Like child life specialists, there are these like hidden gems in a hospital that my understanding is most people don't know it's a thing until they're there. So how do you encourage people to find out about child life specialists in their hospitals?
That's a great point. You don't know what child life is until you've met one or had to use a child life specialist. So usually at most children's hospitals, there's at least one. We are very fortunate at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta that we have at least one or more child life specialists on every floor and in every unit, including our outpatient units. So if you have an unexpected ER visit or your child gets admitted for a tonsillectomy or an appendectomy or something like that, that might be more scheduled or routine, you can always ask your nurses or your doctors or anyone that is in the hospital setting, "Hey, we'd really like to see a child life specialist," and they'll consult us. Usually, and it's usually by phone or by our charting system. But a lot of times as child life, we are very proactive in seeing, for me specifically with my new diagnosed patients, that's a high need for the day. And that's the first patient I'm going to. So we're really great at prioritizing who we see in each day. That doesn't mean one person's needs are lower. It's just, is this something that's more time sensitive that I need to do right now, or can this wait? But always you can ask your nurse, your doctor, family experience, anybody that's in the hospital, you can always ask for a child life specialist. And again, it's something that you might not even, like, you might meet one of us and be like, "You know what, we're actually great. But we'd love to hear more about the hospital," or, but at the same time you could see like, wow, this is a great resource for my 3 kids at home. And maybe my child's 18 and doesn't need as much, but my 3 younger kids really do. And so how can we all work together to support each other? Just asking, making sure you're advocating. If there's any procedures that are happening and you feel like your child's not going to do well, you can always ask for a child life specialist to come and prep and support for procedures and teach you as a parent how to help with that as well, and if we're not around. So just asking and reaching out.
Well, Becca, thank you. I think this is the perfect you perfectly emulate the phrase, "Not all heroes wear capes."
Oh,
What you do every day to support families in just the most gut-wrenching and just nerve-wracking situations. Not everyone can do that. So thank you for what you do. We are so grateful. And just as a parting note, so much of what Becca shared is what we've developed at SupportNow. This one place for the community to come together, whether that's giving money or scheduling meals, or maybe it's as simple as sending updates, which again can be a big task for a family. And so again, in the God forbid situation, someone is in the hospital that and you want to be the person really rallying that support on behalf of the community, please consider creating a SupportNow registry. It's free, it's simple, and it really is designed to be a shield for the family because we know that they don't have the time, the energy, the patience to respond to all those texts So if you can kind of create one place for that to happen, it can go a long way. So Becca, thank you again, and good luck to you in the
Thank
next
you.
couple of weeks. Very excited for you.
Thank you.